Our top story this evening, US President Donald Trump has once again hinted at reaching a trade agreement with India soon. Speaking to reporters, Trump said the deal will open up India. This comment comes as India's Commerce Ministry officials are in DC as negotiations continue. The statement also comes a day after Trump announced a trade deal with Indonesia and added a deal with India is progressing along the same lines.
We had one yesterday, that was announced. We have another one coming up, maybe with India. I don't know. We're in negotiation. When I send out a letter, that's a deal. In other words, that's a deal. They don't want to ever say that. Oh, how many deals have you made? The best deal we can make is to send out a letter. We're very close to a deal with India where they open it up. Indonesia yesterday was, it wasn't an open country. Now it is.
As India and US continue hectic parleys on trade, Trump's trade tirade has hit many nations around the world. Trump has threatened BRICS nations with 10% tariffs on imports from those countries. Trump said, and I quote, "Anybody that's in BRICS is getting a 10% charge pretty soon. If they're a member of BRICS, they're going to have to pay a 10% tariff." End of quote. That's not all. Trump also threatened 100% secondary tariffs on Russia if Putin does not end the war with Ukraine in 50 days. This would mean that countries that do trade with Russia, like India, China, Brazil, and other nations would face these steep tariffs. Meanwhile, US senators in a joint statement said that any nation that fuels Putin's war machine by buying cheap Russian oil and gas could see the imposition of tariffs as high as 500%. Does President Trump only want to score a trade win with India, or is he seeking India's unwavering support for America's continued dominance as a superpower? How should India navigate an unpredictable Trump administration? Joining me now is Milan Vaishnav, Senior Fellow and Director of the South Asia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He has authored an article in the Foreign Affairs magazine, and in this piece, he argues that Washington's era of strategic altruism towards India is over, and now in an uncertain world, there is need for a role reversal. It is time for India to be more generous with Washington, D.C. Do you believe, Milan, and thank you for being with us, do you believe this is possibly the reason that we're not getting a trade deal with US right now? This is why it's taking long, because Donald Trump believes it's payback time?
I think so. I mean, the basic premise of the article is that since the year 2000, when US-India relations began to steadily grow into the strategic embrace that we've enjoyed for the past quarter century, there has been this understanding in Washington, really across Democratic and Republican administrations, that India's rise was inherently good for the United States. And so if the U.S. invested economic, diplomatic, technological, security resources into India's rise, we as Americans didn't necessarily have to ask for instant gratification, right? Because again, a peaceful, secure, powerful, prosperous India was inherently in America's interest. And I think Donald Trump, particularly in his second term, and I think it's important to distinguish his second term from his first, is not in the mood for continuing with this altruism. Many people have described the president's style as transactional. I think that doesn't quite capture it. I would say that he wants the United States to exert dominance over all of America's partners, including its friends, allies, and partners such as India. And so we're in a very different setup in Trump 2.0 than we were in Trump 1.0. And I think that's going to have an impact on the trajectory of US-India relations.
But Milan, what do you think we can really give to Washington? We have these red lines on agriculture and dairy. We've already said that we will buy more defense equipment, and we're talking about buying P-8I aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft from the United States. We're talking about a GE 414 deal. In fact, the delays on the US part. There are other deliveries such as Apache helicopters, and all of them have been delayed on the part of the United States. We would want to buy more, but there is a track record of delays as well. And then there is some sort of doubt about F-35s because this aircraft, earlier versions have been with Pakistan. So keeping in mind some of these red lines, what can we really offer?
I think it's a very good question. I mean, the Trump administration came into office, and I think they made three very concrete asks, right? The first is that unless the US and India could negotiate a trade accord, India would be subject to 26% tariffs. At the present moment, those have been deferred. India is subject to a 10% tariff. And I'm hoping that we'll see a deal relatively soon. I think part of the issue with why we haven't seen a deal is not necessarily due to India's intransigence, although there may be part of that when it comes to agricultural goods, but also shifting goalposts on the part of the US administration. It's very hard for America's partners to figure out where exactly it wants to end up in these negotiations. I think the second is on defense, as you mentioned. I don't think that anyone in Washington expects that the US is going to overnight end its decades-long reliance on Russian arms imports, but they would like to see the speed with which the U.S. is seen as a kind of primary or principal defense supplier increase, just as it's increased with France, Israel, and others. And I think the third, as you mentioned, is on energy, where I think there's two components. I think the first is the United States would like to see India purchase more LNG gas and oil from the United States, but they would also want India to amend its civil nuclear liability laws, which have really prevented the U.S. and U.S. companies from investing in India's civilian nuclear industry. So I think that you're quite right when you said that India has really moved on all of these fronts. But this is an administration that is thinking about the here and now, and I'll constantly ask the question, what have you done for me lately? So there's a constant game, unfortunately, in my view, that friends and partners have to play, which is trying to show and trying to give this president quick wins.
Right. I would also like to ask you, you've mentioned in your article that you believe that that many in the US have always believed that India's upward trajectory will eventually shift the Asian balance in favor of the United States. Do you now believe that, be it the Democrats or Republicans, somehow they don't believe that India's rise will necessarily shift the balance in the US's favor? Look at the kind of attention the US president is giving to Pakistan right now.
Well, let's leave Pakistan aside for a second, although happy to come back to it. Let's just focus on India. I think there has been a bipartisan consensus that I believe is still there in the Democratic Party. It's still there in the traditional Republican Party. Where it is sort of losing out is in the MAGA component of the Republican Party, which of course is arguably its biggest piece. Where, if you step back, I think political leaders of all stripes have understood the importance that India plays in the Asia Pacific as a bulwark potentially against a rising authoritarian expansionist China, but also because, it is a future market for American companies. There is a massive migration corridor of Indians coming to the United States and settling here. More than 5.2 million people of Indian origin reside in the United States. I think these are arguments that are well rehearsed, that are well known. I think in Trump 2.0, however, these arguments don't hold as much water, right? So India presenting itself as a potential democratic counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific just doesn't have the sort of resonance that it used to have. So, if we were in a Kamala Harris administration, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Frankly, if we were in a Mitt Romney or administration or a Nikki Haley administration, we also wouldn't be having this conversation. So this is something that I think is very peculiar to and specific to the Make America Great Again movement and the way that Trump in his second iteration has decided to look at the world.
What I would also like to understand from you, you're speaking about Donald Trump's inner circle and also the Make America Great Again vote bank and politicians close to him who strongly owe allegiance to this vote bank as well. Now, what do these people really want of India? We can buy more energy. We can reduce the trade deficit. $45 billion. It's not very difficult to bridge. You can buy more defense equipment. The foreign secretary in February had said we will buy $25 billion worth of energy from the US. So you can do that. But this Trump administration is constantly changing goalposts. Their demands are changing. Even those earlier trade deals, which have been honored by successive U.S. administrations, are being broken, are being torn apart, and Trump is wanting more. So even if we give in those concessions, we buy more, what is the kind of guarantee that 6 months later Trump won't change his mind?
There's very little guarantee, and I think this is a real fact that America's friends and partners, whether United Kingdom, Japan, France, India, Indonesia, name your country, they're all feeling the same situation. And my basic point is, I think the best India can do is to try and give wins that it can live with, that don't cause it massive domestic political backlash, in an attempt essentially to try to run out the clock on Trump. Trump is going to be president for another 3.5 years. There's nothing that India can do about that, or anyone else, until the next election in 2028. But I think India has to act on the assumption that there will be a different president come 2029 January, and hopefully this intense kind of transactional attitude will subside. And the reason that I think the United States is still important is severalfold. I think one, India has quite ambitious goals for becoming a developed country by the year 2047. That's going to require foreign capital, foreign investment coming from the United States above all others. When it comes to India's own insecure neighborhood, we've seen already on the battlefield that during Operation Sindoor, India was fighting not just Pakistan, but Pakistan and China together. I think the Indian military at the highest levels have made that very clear about the extent of collusion they saw on the battlefield between China and Pakistan. And when it comes to technology, India is still seeking that technology transfer from the United States. I mean, India aspires to be a power when it comes to cutting edge technologies like artificial intelligence, but it doesn't necessarily have the domestic resources to create that capacity. So they're looking to foreign companies, whether it's Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, and so on and so forth, to help them build that capacity. So, this is India is stuck between a rock and a hard place. I certainly acknowledge that. But I think a strong U.S.-India relationship is in India's long-term interest, and so they have to find creative ways of weathering this, what is hopefully a temporary storm.
Right. Very interesting talking to you, Milan, about your article in the Foreign Affairs magazine about why it's time to placate the United States for India's larger long-term strategic interests. We've completely run out of time, but thanks once again for being with us. Let's now take a quick look at the other headlines.